Thank you, everybody, for joining the Institute's live webinar. David Albright, President and founder of the Institute for Science and International Security, will be presenting on the threat posed by Iran's nuclear program leading up to the current conflict, and he will also show what damage has been inflicted in the recent days. David will speak for about an hour, then we will have 30 minutes of Q&A. The chat is disabled, so please use the Q&A function. We are recording the session, and the recording will be made available. Go ahead, David.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think the idea for this is that for several years, we've been doing Twitter Spaces, or X Spaces, as they're now called, and I'm a little frustrated that we can't particularly show imagery. And so the idea today is just to, in a sense, run some of the things that we'd normally do on an X space, but then try to do it with a lot of photographs of what's going on in Iran. And what I'd like to do is start with kind of the situation before the June 2025 war. I mean, in a sense, this war is a continuation of that war, and it is Iran and Israel with the United States are kind of involved in a very unstable dynamic, and I talk a little later. It's not clear at all to me that this would be the last of the wars unless there's some really decisive outcome. Now, we work on the nuclear side. We're aware of missile issues and can address some of that in the questions, but really this talk is on the nuclear program of Iran. And before the June war, we were really confronted with in a sense, and I'll define it later, a nuclear weapons program that was shortening timelines and looked to be on the verge of making a decision one way or another whether to build nuclear weapons. And obviously the fear was they would move toward building them. And one of the ways to see how they'd shorten timelines is to consider the weapon grade uranium stock or potential of Iran, where Iran had reached a point where it could quickly produce weapon grade uranium for a nuclear weapon, and we call that a breakout time. And we developed this back in 2008, 2009 to try to measure the threat posed by Iran's growing gas centrifuge program and stocks of enriched uranium. And the calculation does involve total enrichment capacity, in a sense, the number of centrifuges, and the type, and then how much enrichment material have they produced, and we're obviously 3.5% is not as valuable in the calculation as 60%. And we added into that as the capability grew of just how many more could be made of this what we consider a significant quantity of 25 kilograms of weapon grade uranium. And we've picked that number. It's similar to the IA number of a significant quantity. It just happened to be the amount in a Chinese design that was for a ballistic missile warhead that China gave to Pakistan. And so we know it exactly because what Pakistan gave to India ended up in Libya, and that was discovered by inspectors. In any case, the breakout time in Iran prior to the June war, and again, apologize for all the words on these slides. I'm not going to read it by any means, but Iran had gotten itself into a position that just using its stock of 60% enriched uranium, that it could make about 230 kilograms of weapon grade uranium in 3 weeks at the Fordow fuel enrichment plant. And that's enough for 9 nuclear weapons using the metric we use. And it could have produced its first quantity of 25 kilograms of weapon grade uranium in Fordow in as little as 2 to 3 days. And if Iran then turned its entire production complex into breaking out, it could have produced enough weapon grade uranium for 11 nuclear weapons in the first month, enough for 15 by the second month, and then by jumping to the end, 22 by the end of the fifth month. So it's a huge capability to make weapon grade uranium in a very short period of time. And that in a sense symbolizes Iran's nuclear weapons program to us. And there was no civilian reason to make 60% enriched uranium at this stock. They can't possibly ever use that amount, and it's way beyond what would be needed for any leverage in a negotiation. So it looks just to develop a capability to shorten the timeline to get weapon grade uranium, which is really the long pole in the tent of making nuclear weapons. Now, we don't think a standard definition of a nuclear weapons program applies to Iran. Prior to the war, we had not seen Iran making a decision to build a bomb. Um, and Iran didn't have what some like to call a structured, systematic nuclear weapons program either. They did have that in the early 2000s. And when Director General Grossi talks about this, he's actually referring back to that program, codenamed the Mod Plan, that Iran had in the early 2000s to crash to build five nuclear weapons. And it was a very, very dedicated program. Every part of making a nuclear weapon was represented, from an enrichment plant, which we now know is Fordow, and by all kinds of programs to develop the nuclear weapons components. And that program ended in 2003. And in other lectures, we talk about why. But at the end of that program, another program emerged, smaller. And that's a program that we would characterize as being prepared to build nuclear weapons if you get the order. And so, what does a program like that do? It shortens timelines. It makes sure weapon grade uranium can be delivered in a quick amount of time. It makes sure that there's not a bottleneck in a component. Like when the boss says build the bomb, you're saying, we can't build that neutron initiator. Um, or we don't understand how you actually get the explosives to compress the core. And so much of that was actually learned in a mod. The weaponization part actually went much faster and was much more successful than the uranium enrichment part. And that really was ultimately the huge bottleneck in the Ahmad plan in 2003, 2004, as they were years away from being able to produce weapon grade uranium. But nonetheless, they learned a lot on weaponization, but there were some challenges not done, and some of those have been resolved in the intervening years. And so, again, the program is one to be prepared to build the bomb if given the order, and to make sure that it's done as quickly as possible. Now, the central pillar of the weaponization program is centered as I just use the acronym SPND, and it post-Ahmad, there was a series of organizations, all headed by Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, and bringing the Ahmad people with them. And in about 2011, that gelled into SPND, which again headed by Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, with a lot of Ahmad people there. And it was part of the Ministry of Defense, but in recent years, it was given more autonomy and attached by parliamentary law into something much more directly connected to the Iran's general staff, which is much closer bureaucratically to the supreme leader. And the weaponization parts were centered there. And again, I'm not going to go through this slide, but if you wanted to find out who's the work on neutron initiator or the multi-point initiation system for high explosive, that would be an SPND. Now, Fakhrizadeh running SPND also had a much grander vision, and SPND grew into something that we would equate to the US DARPA. So it was involved in developing advanced weapon systems. So it's actually grown to be a pretty powerful military entity within the Iranian military bureaucracy. Now, before the war, there's a lot of debate on how close Iran was to being able to, or how much time Iran needed to build nuclear weapons, and again, we thought the regime had not made up its mind. There are some clear disincentives that it faced, but it certainly was not years, and it wasn't. And to sit there and say that the Iranian nuclear weapons program is like a light switch, it went off in 2003, is very inaccurate. And I wish Director General Grossi would understand what we're all talking about. He alludes to it in every statement he makes, but he doesn't quite get it. and he wants more evidence than can be presented. But the bottom line is that there is a nuclear weapons program. It is not the Ahmad plan, and there wasn't a light switch that went off, and the bomb program ended in 2003 and 2004. It has not been restarted. And for us, that's just the wrong analytical platform to even debate this issue. A way to just simply argue that is, why did they make 60% enriched uranium after making 20%? Um, if they weren't trying to have a capability to make a nuclear weapon quickly in a context where they hadn't decided to do it. But anyway, this is a little bit of a diversion, but it's an important one, and we often see in social media that people will argue that, well, Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, and that, or have a nuclear weapons program, and they quote Director General Grossi, and that is actually not all that he's saying, and that it's just that he garbles the rest of it in his statements. Um, Now, what are the timelines? Again, these are ours. And if Iran wanted to recreate the Ahmad plan, pick it up. Just pick up where they left off. They did shut down some facilities. Fort Al continued. It was called the Al Gadir program. The long pole in the tent continued from Ahmad. They continued some other ones. But if they just picked it up, we thought it would take them about 2 years to get to the point where they could fulfill the goal of Ahmad, which was to serially be able to build warheads for ballistic missiles. Um, Another part of this is, what if the leadership said we want it now? And our assessment was that if they could overcome or finish the challenges they had to um, face in finishing the construction of a non-missile deliverable warhead, and they could do that within 6 months. Some thought sooner. I mean, you probably remember that public debate. Some thought a couple months. I mean, we felt that there were some challenges and they would need in total 6 months. Um, it doesn't mean that at T=0 they would break out with and try to get weapon grade uranium. They may have delayed that until month 4, for example. The challenges we saw mostly were in the final assembly of the device, and making sure that the device as a system would function and, in essence, blow up if you detonate it, and achieve a significant nuclear yield. Now, let me now jump to the June war, and go through first a summary, and then I want to show essentially the rest of this presentation is showing pictures. Um, during the war, Iran's gas centrifuge program was essentially destroyed. Natanz and Fordow had over 20,000 centrifuges. They were either destroyed or put out of operation. Centrifuge manufacturing development facilities were destroyed. The key facility, the only facility to take natural uranium, let's say it's called Yellowcake, comes out of a mine and a mill, and then it's turned into uranium hexafluoride, which is the feed gas for gas centrifuges, was thoroughly destroyed. Fuel fabrication facilities were destroyed. Many of the facilities to make the nuclear weapon itself were destroyed. Israel very visibly destroyed the facility that would take would have taken, if the decision had been made, weapon grade uranium hexafluoride, and turned it into weapon grade uranium metal. And that's a process that involves several steps. But one of the steps, and this is the one they destroyed, goes from the uranium tetrafluoride, UF4, to metal. And if without that step, you can't go from the uranium hexafluoride to uranium metal. There were 5 sites that we could identify or were announced that were involved in the process of nuclear weaponization. And we think that Israel's strategy is to lay out the nuclear weapons processes. There's some, as I mentioned, some are in series, some are in parallel. And if you taken one in series example I gave, and you want to go from A to D, you have to go through B and C, um, and it's linear. So if you destroy C, they can't go from A to D, and D would be the final component. And so we think that they look for bottlenecks or vulnerabilities in a process line and then try to destroy it. They also made a point of killing more than 11 key nuclear scientists, um, and terrified and threatened many others, and created an informant program, and they targeted the expertise needed in these programs. And again, knowledge can't be destroyed, but experience can be. And this is engineering. This isn't theoretical physics. And some engineering things can be destroyed, um, and takes a long time to recover that capability. Just look at, now this is a bad example, but relevant. Look at how long it took for things that the Romans did before they were done again in Western Europe. And those are engineering problems. And so this the nuclear weapons program, it's in the modern age, it's certainly those timeframes don't apply, but you can seriously delay the ability of the program to produce the warhead, the nuclear warhead, by destroying their engineering capabilities. Now, pictures of what was destroyed. This is an overhead of the Natanz enrichment site, and the first thing Israel did in that site was destroy all the electrical capability, to just shut it down, and also destroy the pilot enrichment plant, which um, was making 60% enriched uranium, a fairly relatively small amount, but nonetheless was making 60% enriched uranium. And then I don't show it in here, but Israel used 3 earth penetrators to go through the 3 boxes, in a sense, that underlie this dirt. And then the United States came through and used 2 GBU 57s to really destroy one of the hulls. And here's a very old picture overlaid with the targets of the GBU 57. And you can see there's 2 major boxes in the underground, and another. And Israel put an earth penetrator into each one of those. Now, the one the US picked was the one that had the centrifuges. The others did not have centrifuges. The little one was for support, and probably had a lot of enriched uranium in it. This plant made enriched uranium up to 5%. But you can see here that the center of that circle we put on this graph does lie over the box, and we think that GBU's 57 just heavily destroyed the inside of the centrifuge plant. This is from the Pentagon the day they announced what they did at Fordow, and it's a little complicated, and I'm not going to cover it all, but basically it's showing the Fordow Mountain and what they hit, and that they had successfully identified vulnerabilities in the mountain. It's an old design back around probably 2000, and it didn't envision a bunker buster able to hit it. It was probably more thinking of bombs and missiles. But nonetheless, let me make sure. Well, I think it's easier to do it this way. This is and 2 images, one overlaid the other. One is from 2009, which shows this construction of the ventilation shafts. And then the other is the holes created by the GBU 57s. There were 3 holes in each shaft, 6 and 2 down each one. And we had this image because well, I'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, we had looked at this image years ago, in trying to understand the construction of the Fordow enrichment plant, or as it used to be called, the Al Gadir project. but you can see that it very precise targeting down these ventilation shafts. Now, here's why we were looking at that one ventilation shaft. The one in the middle was this is a schematic of the Fort Al. Again, it was called the Algadir enrichment plant, and the back hall was centrifuge cascade hall, and then where the you can't see it here anymore, but where the in the center where the mops went down, that was a ventilation shaft. And so we were, and then you can follow out the tunnel entrances. And this thing's about 80 meters underground. Um, and in a sense, the design flaw was to build ventilation shafts that essentially go from the centrifuge plant up to the surface. And some people have tried to speculate they zig and zag, but there's no evidence of that at all. And um, and then what we didn't know in this plan was Iran put in another ventilation shaft that would touch down on the end of the main centrifuge cascade hall, and you can see that up in the upper right. And so these blast waves come down here, and they're going to be very destructive as they go through this highly confined space. And centrifuges are pretty fragile. If you start banging them around, they're going to break. And particularly if they're running at the time that this blast came through. Now, the reason we knew about this point is if you look at this diagram, we needed to geolocate it, and we knew where the tunnel entrances were, but we needed a third point, and that's what drew us to this ventilation shaft. Was it gave us a third point directly above what's on this schematic, and then we could do this overlay as a result. Here's the Esfahan nuclear site that was hit a couple times by Israel. That's in blue. First strike, red strike in well, no, they hit it twice. The red is the where the US hit it. um, and over on the left, you can see the three tunnel entrances of Esfahan Mountain. And that's where and that was declared by Iran when it was originally built back in 2003, 4, 5. I can't remember the exact date, as a place where they could move valuable assets in case of military strike. So it was built as a defensive facility, and the understanding is that Iran moved 60% and 20% enriched uranium into that tunnel complex before the war. Director General Grossi said recently that he thinks, based on what he knows, which would be pretty precise, that Iran moved 200 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium into those tunnels. And what the United States did was attack them with Tomahawk missiles. They also attacked in these areas marked red at the main site, key buildings with Tomahawks, including the facility to be able to make uranium hexafluoride gas. This picture is a little hard to see. I didn't annotate it, but it kind of down here is the southern tunnel entrance, and that represents the damage done by the Tomahawks. Here's the middle entrance over here, and a little hard to see the damage, but the southern entrance was pretty heavily damaged, and we don't know how deep the damage goes. Depends on the warhead. I mean, a warhead that can go on the Tomahawk can be an earth penetrator. And they redesigned the Tomahawk. It could actually be a fuel air bomb using leftover jet fuel, which could create a thermobaric bomb that would then propagate a sort of a fire. I mean, it'll be crude, high, very damaging fire deep into the tunnel complex. But we don't know if they use those warheads, and the Pentagon has refused to give us an answer. But in any case, tunnel entrances were heavily destroyed, and possibly damage was done inside the building. Here's an example of a centrifuge manufacturing site. Though there were buildings there in the red area, they're gone. This is two pictures actually, before and after of Kalai Electric. the original and one of the main, if not the main centrifuge research and development facility. It's in Tehran. Um, Started in the late 90s. It's where they first enriched uranium. And you can see, well, you can tell where Kauai Electric is among these buildings by the building missing, particularly two buildings missing. On the weaponization side, on the left is what we call SP&D headquarters. There was another copy of the nuclear archive that describes the Ahmad plan that one copy Israel purloined in 2018 in Tehran in an intelligence mission. Um, Building was heavily damaged. This other copy was damaged, was destroyed, according to the Israelis. I don't know how they did it. They didn't bring down the building, but the idea again was, if you look at the nuclear archive, it's filled with calculations, nuclear weaponization calculations, plans for, how do you do the testing of the components, lots of data from those tests. And and it and that may be in someone's head, but they're valuable documents to train, in a sense, the next generation, the ones who have to continue the program as it goes on year after year. And so the idea was destroy these test results, years of work actually to generate these results. Um, on the right is a facility of SP&D that hosted several divisions of SP&D, and there were several buildings destroyed. I mean, and also a building may look upright, but the shock wave from a nearby explosion, it does severe damage to it that you just don't see in a satellite image. Um, Sanjarian was a site in the Ahmad plan involved in testing the multi-point initiation system, sort of smaller tests, less high explosive involved in those tests. Um, in the last couple of years, it had been reactivated, and their SP and or people from the Ahmad plan were doing sensitive high explosives testing there, and with two strikes, it was obliterated. Um, Maybe I shouldn't use that word, but anyway, heavily destroyed. It's hard to see what's left in the picture on the right. There was a site we didn't know about, Shahid Meysami, which the Israelis destroyed, that was explained to the media in different ways, explained by the IDF in different ways. One was it's more related to the kind of weapon grade uranium core of a nuclear weapon, others that it involved important chemicals needed in a nuclear weapons program, but it was identified as a nuclear weaponization facility. And that was pretty heavily destroyed. And I should emphasize, um, Israel is hitting, a building very precisely. It knows where these things are. So it had heavily penetrated the nuclear weaponization side of this program, and they went out to systematically destroy key nodes or key points of that program. Interesting, they did not choose to do the same thing. Well, let me take that back. In October 2024, they destroyed the Telegon 2 building. And Telegon 2, if you look on the left, that's an Ahmad plan layout. It's a 2004 image, and it was two facilities, Telegon 1 in the middle, Telegon 2 in the right, that had high explosive chambers in them that were doing explosive tests of nuclear weapons components. The one in the middle could go up 50 to 70 kilograms of high explosive, the one on the right much less, but nonetheless we're able to test components and within a confined container in a nondescript building. We think everything was emptied from those buildings in the 2010s as the IA scrutinized them, and we know Telegon 1 was emptied. We think Telegon 2 was also emptied. But later in recent years, according to Axio and our own research, Iran started making a subcomponent of a nuclear weapon, subcomponent of a multi-point initiation system that detonates the high explosives that then compress the core, and it was making it in that building and in an attack by Israel focused on the um, missile program, particularly solid state missiles. They also destroyed this building, and you can see it pretty thoroughly destroyed. Now, I mentioned scientists killed. I won't go through this slide, but they had we could have linked 9 of them explicitly to a mod. Um, they had different skills in explosives or multi-point initiation of explosives. Um, 3 were linked to nuclear coding or simulation relevant to nuclear weapons development. Um, Experts in neutron initiators, diagnostics, um, foreign procurements, some linked to work on new ballistic missiles, and 2 had done theoretical work on gas centrifuges. And Ahmad actually did have a gas centrifuge program independent or not independent, in parallel to the Atomic Energy Organization enrichment program. And in fact, the Al Gadir enrichment plant that was going to make weapon grade uranium under the Ahmad plan, which AKA Fordow, was going to get 3.5% enriched uranium from the Atomic Energy Organization enrichment program, which was centered at Natanz and was sized to make low enriched uranium for nuclear power reactors, but would provide a feed stream of 3.5% enriched uranium into Fordow to ease its way to making weapon grade uranium, essentially um, produce or provide 70% of the enrichment effort so that Fordow would only have to produce 30% of the enrichment effort to get to weapon grade uranium. And so the programs were linked, but after the end of Ahmad, all centrifuge expertise went to the Atomic Energy Organization, and they actually took over Fordow. Now, I think I've talked enough about this that the killing of these people does have an effect. I mean, obviously they can recover in the long run, but they're going to be weakened when they do. Um, Now, what remained, and this has been hotly debated, and I think the biggest um, well, let me say this: the program was essentially destroyed, the centrifuge program, but I would put it as dangerous remnants continued to exist, and um, and so what are they? Well, the obvious one is the 60% enriched uranium, but there's also 20% enriched uranium, and there's 3.5% or 4.5%. And so there's a total of 9 tons of enriched uranium that's in the form of uranium hexafluoride, which is the easiest to use if you want to break out. There's also another ton or so, 863 kilograms, that's not in hexafluoride form. It's in different chemical forms, uranium oxide, for example. And this was not affected in a measurable way in this attack. And so Iran was left with at least portions of this inventory. And I'll come back and talk more about this um, in a few minutes. But essentially, what Iran had was a full year's worth of the production of the entire centrifuge program that existed prior to the June war. So a full year of operation of that program could have produced this amount of enriched uranium. And a good portion of that was in the 60%. So the quantity of the 60% is much smaller than, for example, the material enriched up to 5%. But in terms of the enrichment effort, we call it the separative work, the bulk of it is in that small amount of material. So it's money in the bank that Iran can pull out and use in a breakout that and if you have 60%, and I've talked about how much more effort do you have to do to get to weapon grade uranium. When you have 60%, you have to do 1% more effort to get to weapon grade uranium. And so it's extremely valuable material from a nuclear weapons point of view. Also, Iran had announced before the June war that it was going to was building a fourth enrichment plant. I mean, two are at Natanz, one at Fordow. They were building another one at Esfahan. The I doesn't know where it is. I'm sure it has its own ideas. They don't know the status of it. Um, Iran announced it in an act of a kind of anger and aggression. The Board of Governors of the IA just passed a very condemning resolution. Iran is routinely, I don't want to say sanctioned, but judged as being in violation of its safeguards agreement, which is essentially making it in violation of the NPT. When that happens, it then retaliates. One of the retaliations was to announce they had another secret enrichment program. So go figure. They're being accused of cheating, and so what do? They show they're cheating even more, and by saying they have a secret enrichment program, and they've done this. This would be the fourth time. Natanz they hid, Fordow they hid until they were caught, and now they're doing the same with Esfahan. But it could be that it was a statement of anger, and the plant isn't very far along. We think it's in the Esfahan mountain. We don't have direct proof of that by any means, but we think it's there. And so what was left after June was the enriched uranium, particularly the highly enriched uranium, the 60%, and then some unknown number of centrifuges that were not deployed in Fordow and Esfahan. And the Esfahan tunnels, as I said, were pretty much destroyed, but I'll show some pictures of what happened afterwards. But and whatever was in Fordow probably would require serious excavation to get to. But nonetheless, um, some of that stock could be accessible. Now, Pickaxe Mountain, which is often in the news, it's a facility that's being built by Iran since about 2020. It replaced a facility Israel blew up that was on the surface at Natanz enrichment plant. They wanted to build it underground and protect it. It's very deep. It's not finished. It is centrifuge related. It would be declared as a facility to assemble advanced centrifuges um, by the thousands every year. I mean, Iran can't do that anymore, but that's the declaration. The one blown up and by Israel was clearly would have been able to do that. We don't, we a couple of years ago assessed that it could very well hold a centrifuge plant. I mean, it's pretty big underground facility, bigger than what's needed for a centrifuge assembly facility. And so it's possible there is a centrifuge plant there too, planned. Now, after the war, we've been watching it with satellite imagery. We saw that Fordow they were looked down the GBU holes. They looked at the entrances, but basically they buttoned it up pretty quickly. It just had abandoned it. We think it was really thoroughly destroyed. At Natanz, we see two types of activity. One is protection, and this is an example where it involves the HVAC equipment, the air conditioning equipment. I mean, if you're going to run an underground site, you have to cool it. You have to make sure there's ventilation. And so in the left, there's some HVAC systems that are bundled together. And in August, we saw that they were taking them, individual units, they're, I think, over 20, and just moving them around the site. And that's the circles on the right. They felt that could be bombed and it would make it much harder to start the plant. I mean, we didn't think HVAC units were particularly sensitive, but to the Natanz people, they evidently are to the point where they disperse them. We saw recovery operations. The only thing we can assess, they put up a roof over the Natanz pilot enrichment plant, which does have centrifuges, but also has some X amount of 60% enriched uranium. And and so we think they probably were trying to do some recovery operations there. At Pickaxe Mountain, we just saw continued construction, um, and and also hardening. We also, I want to draw your attention to it's in this diagram. It's on the bottom right. It's 2007 tunnel entrances, and it's undergone some recent expansion, and it it was discovered. We were involved in discovering it and publicizing that information, and the IA also discovered it, went to Iran, and Iran refused to talk to them about this tunnel complex. I mean, at Esfahan tunnel complex, they had let the inspectors actually go inside it. Um, but here they wouldn't admit that it was associated with Natanz. Now it's within the common security perimeter of the larger Pickaxe Mountain site, and and we think it's certainly associated with Natanz. Um, what we saw in the fall was the hardening, but also the backfilling, just basically sealing it up as if something's been moved in there. We have no idea what. I mean, obviously, we suspect it could be enriched uranium from Natanz, all this less than 5%, but again, don't know. It could be centrifuges, but clearly they want to protect it. And at Pickaxe Mountain itself, the main site, you can witness satellite imagery, the hardening with concrete over the tunnel entrances and dirt to try to harden them. But the entrances stayed open because the site is still under construction. Yeah, and here's some pictures of the hardening of the tunnel entrances. Here's just a, I don't know what to call this, 3D image of the tunnel entrances at the Esfahan mountain site. You can see the mountain. It's not that high. We don't think this is deeply buried as Fort Owl or Pickaxe Mountain. Um, the as I mentioned, the site was built in the 2004-5 range. They went back in and were doing work in 2020, 2021, which is one of the things that leads us to think that maybe the Esfahan enrichment plant is inside there. That would be a reason to expand it. But in any case, that's the location of the three tunnel entrances. Here's the northern tunnel entrance has been the one with most activity to open it. And it's a little hard to see with the shadows, but one's from October, one's from November, and they basically cleared the entrance and opened it. We saw tire tracks going up to the entrance, so we think they've gone in. We don't know how deep they've gone in, or how many times, or for what purpose. And they also built chicanes, um, which you can sort of see on the right, which are it's like at a military checkpoint, where you have to drive your car around in a kind of a S pattern. Uh, We think this is to provide some blockage against a direct missile strike. I don't think people in a truck would be coming at it, but who knows what they were thinking. I mean, it doesn't protect from a missile coming in at a high angle. So it's not clear how effective this would be. The later on, basically started seeing him cover up the entrance. Um, but here's just a picture where you can see their vehicles are accessing the area. And then here, jump the gun a little bit here in early February, you can see where they're piling dirt all around and actually covering they covered the entrance. And backfilled I'll just read it. Earth pile on top of entrance to increase overburden, and they backfilled the tunnel entrance with soil. And then I'm going to skip over these, but they did this essentially did the same thing at the middle and southern. Um, we're not totally sure. We don't think they got it. Sarah can correct me. We don't think they gained access to the middle tunnel entrance. And the southern one, we don't think they gained access. That one was probably the most destroyed of the three. But again, they covered it all with dirt. This is a little hard to see, but you don't see any tunnel entrances. All three are now covered up to the level of the ground. At the main site, at some point they put up a roof over what we think is the centrifuge related building. It was involved in centrifuge manufacturing um, to do recovery operations. These images are, well, from January. It was pretty far along by then. And on the left, you can see the what the bombing or missile attacks had done to that same building. At SP&D headquarters, the left is from October, and you can still on the sort of see the SP&D headquarters. It's pretty heavily damaged. They brought it down by February, but right next to it, you can see on the image on the right, they started excavating for a new building. At the Mojade site, they were clearing. The one on the left is July 3rd, showing the bomb damage, and then the one on the right shows the clearing. Um, no building, but just basically clearing recovery operations. Shahid. Mesami, it's mostly recovery operations, some at least repaving. I don't think not much rebuilding, but recovery would be an important activity to try to gather up equi whatever equipment. Some of it could be quite heavy that was in the buildings. And at Telegon 2, this rebuilding program at Telegon 2 started before the June War. And on the left, you can see that they built something with it looks like some kind of blast protection on the one end. It's built into the hillside. And then after that, they then put concrete plates on it and then buried it in dirt. So we don't know what's going on in these buildings, but in one of the images you could see which we put, and you can see that in a study we published yesterday on our website that there's it could be a high explosive chamber of some type. It's a cylindrical object, and which is common shape for a high explosive chamber, and it's inside the building, pokes out the end during one's construction phase. And here is the just a nice image of they're putting up passive defense fence structures again to make it harder for drones. The idea when it's finished, pre-detonate a high explosive, a missile warhead of some type or a bomb. Skip this for now. Want to jump to the current war, and we haven't found that many nuclear sites targeted. And it's for the Israelis, it follows a similar pattern of going after nuclear weaponization sites. But one thing that did happen on a nuclear site, this is Natanz, is there was activity around the vehicle entrance of the underground halls. And I'll show some pictures of that are better. But here is the overhead of the building itself. There's a ramp that goes down, and there were vehicles, and Israel decided to take out that vehicle entrance and the two personnel entrances. They're actually small buildings, and they attack those. And in the upper right, you can see pointed to the two personnel entrances. And then on the left, the same building I just showed from a higher distance. And this just is a composite that shows on the very top, you can see the personnel access buildings. On the right, in the satellite image, you can see how they were destroyed. The next picture on the left is the building covering the vehicle tunnel entrance. The one below that is taken from within. It's a horseshoe shape, and so at the sort of the rounded part of the horseshoe looking out, you can see the end of the tunnel entrance that is in that building. And then on the right, you can see how they destroyed it and went after where it does intersect at its deepest point with the rest of it. We can only assume that Israel and the United States got nervous that too much recovery operations were being done in the underground halls. Israel destroyed we call an engineering laboratory type building in an area north of the main Mojade site, believed to be nuclear weapons related. Israel did not announce this site. We just found it in our survey looking for destroyed nuclear related sites. And we think there's something to do with nuclear weaponization, but we don't have anything official from Israel. This is another shot of it. Partly what got us there was a social media showing a blast at the site, and we could geolocate it based on the water tower that you see circled in orange on the right, and then correlate it with a satellite image, and then look and see the destroyed building in a satellite image. And you can see in the left, the bottom, there's the Mojade site. There's a little right angle red figure there by it. The Israelis announced that they attacked this site, Min Zadeh, I can't pronounce it correctly. It's a fairly large facility. Um, we didn't know about it. I think the Israelis talked about the weaponization people moved in, nuclear weaponization component, um, and after the June war, um, alternative their a group moved in to work on a nuclear weapons component. We don't know if it's a division or a section of the weaponization people moved in, or they're working on a particular component there. So the Israelis will only reveal so much. Um, but they hit the site, and on the left is just another turn the thing up perpendicular, and then on the right, the yellow circles represent bomb blasts. Here's a little close up of the main buildings, um, and you can see the left is the buildings before the strike, and then on the right you can see pretty much they're gone. And there's a crater to the right of the building. We don't know what that is. It may have been a miss. This was posited as an underground site. We think it's a facility with underground features, some of which we think are built into the buildings built into the hillside. Um, Down in the bottom, there's this what looks to be a building. It's actually a courtyard. Um, it has vehicles next to it, and at the where it's hitting the hillside, there is a building behind that built into the hillside. But we couldn't find evidence, and we looked at years of satellite imagery of any tunnel construction or any underground facility construction. So we think it's just a combination of above ground and some below ground facilities built into hillsides. I mean, this is just recent. Telegon 2 was hit again, and it was hit with some kind of earth penetrator. Israel has earth penetrators. As I mentioned, they used them on the Tons, on the underground halls, and here they put 3 in through the roof of Telegon 2 and did a pretty thorough job. And you can tell that because the blast wave blew out damaged the front of the building and damaged nearby buildings. So we think whatever was going on there, it's ended. Um, Israel also targeted senior SP&D officials. They hit the Defense Council um, early in the war, in fact, opening stages, and it was a, you can see, Shamkhani was killed. So he's a top advisor, that was a top advisor to the Supreme Leader. He'd been Ministry of Defense head. He was very important in the creation of the Ahmad Plan back in 1999 and 2000. I think he continued to have a role in on nuclear weaponization effort. Um, there were two SP&D officials on this Defense Council. One is the chairman, the current chairman, and the another is a former chairman. So out of these um, seven people, two were SP&D officials. So shows you the importance of SP&D. And also if nuclear weapons are going to be made, how close they are to the top leadership. Um, Now, many things have not been attacked. The enriched uranium again. Um, I think as this assessment evolves, we think could be up to half of it is in the Fordell Mountain. President Trump, before the June war, said Iran was moving things into that mountain to protect them. There was media reporting saying, oh, things were being taken out. I mean, we saw lines of trucks, but the trucks we saw were dump trucks bringing dirt in to pile around the entrances, not the kind of equipment that would be involved in hauling away the kind of equipment found in an enrichment plant, which is sensitive and needs to be protected against elements, weather, for example. And so it's possible that much of the HEU is in there and cannot be assessed. As I mentioned, Grossi said they think 200 kilograms of the 60% could be um, in the Esfahan Mountain, along with X number of centrifuges potentially. And then all this other enriched uranium is someplace. And I want to emphasize, I mean, if it's 5% enriched, 4.5% enriched, you're 70% of the way to weapon grade uranium. So it's not the kind of material if you want to just leave in Iran if you can get it out. And diplomacy failed. I mean, the U.S. had tried and ran into an intransigent Iran that according to Witkoff, they said that don't expect to get through in terms of the stocks, and he was talking about all 9 tons or 10 tons, 10 tons actually. Don't expect to get through negotiations, which you couldn't get militarily. And so um, I don't think Iran understood again that it had a real clock running, and now we're back to the situation where can the U.S. and Israel destroy these stocks or make them unrecoverable? I mean, in a theory, not in theory, I mean, you can, like Fordow is now a low-level nuclear waste site, essentially, with some amount of enriched uranium in it. Doesn't cause any risk to the environment. Uranium is not very radiotoxic. Fluorine is extremely toxic, but locally, um, and it doesn't. I mean, it reacts so quickly with water that it's if it does leak out through groundwater, its potential toxicity has been reduced. It's still not something you want to drink or be around, but anyway, it's there isn't that much of it ultimately. Um, if this was in the 200 kilograms that Grossi said was in Esfand Mountain was entombed in the mountain, it would it would be entombed in the mountain. Um, there's been discussions of recovering it. Just go back to the Esfand complex. Military people going in to try to get it, but at the same time, I mean, I showed you the entrances are covered by a large amount of dirt. So going in there is potentially time consuming, not potentially, is time consuming, and you're going to need bulldozers and dump trucks in order to clear the entrances, and you don't know how damaged the insides are, so you don't know how easy it would be to get to the canisters if they're intact of 60% enriched uranium. And if they're not, then you're walking into a area or closed area that has uranium hexafluoride that's reacted with the moisture in the air and it could be quite dangerous without hazmat suits. And so we were interested in a recent New York Times piece that said there's a personnel entrance. I mentioned there were personnel entrances at the tons and then vehicle entrances. The three tunnel entrances are really vehicle entrances. So now is there a personnel entrance? And um, the one the New York Times presented in a satellite image, we don't think is a personnel entrance at all. And I can answer questions, but we wrote a study on this and published it. I mean, we think it's a water recovery. It's related to water recovery and harnessing rain runoff from the water from the mountain. But there could be a personnel entrance. Now, Iran now knows that we know they have a personnel entrance. So I don't think I would want to be in the military force that has to try to go into some narrow tunnel and that goes on for some indeterminate amount of time that could be heavily booby trapped. So God knows why this was leaked. Could be to somebody who poses such a mission. It could be for other reasons, but nonetheless, it would be very hard to go in and recover the enriched uranium from that facility and the the tunnel at Esfahan that I'm sorry, at Natanz that was covered probably was easier to get into, but we don't know what's there. It could be the other enriched uranium. Um, and then Pickaxe Mountain, the tunnel entrances when we last looked a couple of days ago were still open. No idea what's in there, but it's probably worth destroying. But it may be that it's empty. So military missions are probably something to consider very seriously if the areas can be made secure to go there. But I don't think these are in and out missions like the thing when the U.S. grabbed Madura. Um, yeah, and here's some more pictures of Pickaxe Mountain. Um, yeah, I covered these things. Let me stop here. I've talked for an hour. I want to leave time to answer questions, and hopefully this was useful.